Tucked away atop the copper-filled mountains of Jerome, Arizona, sits the five-story, eerily beautiful Jerome Grand Hotel. The hotel actually started out as a hospital in 1926 when Jerome was a bustling mining town. And at one point, its population rocketed to 15,000 residents. But due to illness, injury, suicide, and even presumed murders, over 9,000 souls have entered through to the spirit realm through its halls. Now, you can only imagine the amount of paranormal activity that it holds today. Jerome only holds around 456 residents today, with tourism being its main source of income. The Jerome Grand Hotel is a major pull for the Paranormal Society. So here are the details of this spooky space. Hello, fellow fiends. Welcome to another episode of Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces. I am your host, Cassiopeia. Don't forget, you can find me on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube every Tuesday with the creepiest cases and spookiest spaces. If you subscribe to the Patreon or the Spotify page, which you can do for as little as $5 a month, you get bonus episodes every other week, a merchandise discount, and a welcome box that just a little thank you with creepy cases and spooky spaces swag. Now, I know that you can't always commit to a monthly subscription, so if you'd like to support without subscribing, you can do so with the Cash App or the Venmo, which every little bit helps, even $1 here, $1 there. Also, if you'd like to help out, you can purchase merchandise at the Wick and Faye shop at pizzaandpigtails.com. And then also following along on the socials, liking, commenting, sharing, things like that also help the podcast get seen, helps the algorithm, all that fun stuff. Also, if you are a small business or a big business and you're looking to get your content out there, looking to get your product shown more, I do have budget-friendly ad packages. So if you're looking to be featured on the podcast in a future episode, you can send me an email at creepycases.spookyspaces@gmail.com. Let's get started on this week's spooky space. Jerome, Arizona, sits in the Black Hills of Yavapai County, which started out as a copper mining camp on Cleopatra Hill in 1876. Now, for a little bit of perspective, the town sits about 100 miles north of Phoenix. Before it was Jerome, though, it was inhabited by the Hohokam people from 700 to around 1125 current era. Now, they most likely mined the copper, the malachite, and the azurite, which was plentiful in the mountains and still is. The first Europeans to arrive in the area were Spanish conquistadors who noted the copper-rich land, but they didn't really mine the copper because they were told to look for silver and gold, so they didn't really pay much attention to the copper and all the other stuff that probably could have brought them in some money. Now, the area became part of Mexico in 1821 when they claimed their independence from Spain. But in 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo that concluded the Mexican-American War gave the area over to the United States. In 1888, William A. Clark, a businessman who was already pretty successful and established in Montana, purchased the United Verde Copper Company for $80,000. Now, he brought the new gauge railroad to the area of Jerome, And before the turn of the century, he was actually bringing in over $1 million a month, which he took this, like a large portion of this, and would actually put it back into Jerome and Clarkdale, which was Jerome's sister city. He only brought the best to the area. He only brought the newest technology to the area. He ran the most modern operations, keeping up the highest safety standards, and offered the best benefits as far as housing, pay, schooling, and medical. And he basically offered the best in the country. And Jerome actually flourished. And this is what happens when you take care of your people. Now, Jerome became incorporated in 1899, and in the year 1900, the Montana Hotel opened its doors. It was deemed the finest and most ornate hostelry in Arizona. It was a 200-room luxury destination. Now, sadly, in 1915, a fire destroyed basically the entire building, except you can still see its foundation to this day. Now, the town grew to around 15,000 residents in the 1920s. Now, William Clark sadly passed away in 1925 at age 86, and his sons, William Clark Jr. and Charles Clark, and his grandson, William Clark III, took over the business. But tragedy soon struck the family, and in 1932, William III died in a plane accident. In 1933, Charles Clark passed away due to pneumonia, and in 1934, William Clark Jr. passed away. And it was kind of sad because that's, I mean, just right in a row, just all three of them, just gone. Now, in 1935, the Clark Sr.'s daughters sold the Jerome holdings for almost $23 million. Now, before it was the Jerome Grand Hotel, the building was the United Verde Hospital, and it was actually the fourth hospital that was built in Jerome. And construction started in 1926, and it opened its doors in 1927. The hospital was one of the most state-of-the-art and modern hospitals. It featured patient call lights, balconies, sun porches, emergency lighting, laboratories for different kinds of testing, surgical facilities, an x-ray ward. It had wards for men, women, and children, private rooms, which was basically non-existent at this time, blanket warming closets, and it had the first and only elevator at the time. Now, it did close after 20 years, and all of the staff was transferred over to another hospital in nearby Cottonwood. The building was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1966, and the building was actually gutted in the 1970s and 80s. While it was empty, there was a live-in caretaker, or sometimes the owners would actually lease it out to a family to keep it safe from vandalism or, squatters or the homeless coming in and kind of not being so nice to it. But after the suicide of a caretaker in the 1980s, the building was boarded up and watched over by police and city staff. Now, in 1993, in December of that year, Larry Arthur purchased the building and did a complete renovation, and he actually still owns it today. Now, he wanted to restore it to its pre-1930s grandeur. So, the Jerome Grand Hotel is a mission revival style building with poured in place concrete. It sits on a 50-degree slope of bedrock in the Mingus Mountains. And there's actually very, very little wood. There's none in the frame of the building. It is all concrete, and it's a 30,000 square foot fireproof, earthquake proof, and I guess dynamite blast proof because it had to be built to sustain and survive during the mining, of course. Now, the hotel reopened in 1996, and only 6 rooms were opened at this time while they were still doing construction and renovation. It offers views of the Verde Valley, and claims of experiences didn't begin with the hotel. They actually began with the hospital. And a lot of people think that this is because the flu pandemic that came through and it had a high death toll contributed to a lot of the deaths that occurred. Now, reports in the hotel started coming in, I mean, almost immediately after the hotel opened. Guests will actually report smells like flowers, cigar smoke, whiskey. There's also orbs that are seen moving throughout the building, and televisions will turn on and off by themselves. There's also screams and wails that come from the darkness. Voices coming from empty rooms, and there's even reports of the hospital gurney being pushed down the hallway in a hurry, but when people go to investigate, there's no one there. They even put carpet in this hallway and like where the gurney is heard, but guests and staff both claim that you can still hear it. Shampoo and conditioner bottles roll across the floor or fly across the room. Cell phones are often reported lost, only to be found in other areas of the room or the hotel. Of course, the building being a hospital in a mining town means injury, illness, and death. And like I stated earlier, over 9,000 souls entered the spirit realms through the halls of Jerome, and some still linger in them. During the restoration process, there were art and portraits that were put on the walls in the hallways. The first floor was turned into the lobby, the gift shop, the asylum restaurant, and the kitchen, while the upper floors are all of guest rooms. Now, the asylum restaurant was where the nurses' station and dispensary used to be. And when they started moving the desks out, apparently there was a lot of paranormal activity that investigators claimed was a head nurse that was not happy that they were moving things. And the owners actually had them move desks back. Into the area, and the paranormal activity actually stopped. The gift shop is where the emergency room once was. Now, guests and staff alike have reported uneasy feelings in parts of the hotel. Some will say that they just feel unwanted, which I'm wondering because this was a hospital, and I wonder if the spirits just kind of feel like their privacy is kind of being invaded or it's being impeded upon. But now some people claim that there's almost like a protective energy also. Reports from the hospital and the hotel, though, include labored breathing, coughing, and screaming. Now, a bearded apparition, which most people think could have been like a minor, somebody who did mining, not like a child miner. But they say that he's friendly, and a night duty nurse reported that she went through kind of doing her rounds and was turning off all the lights upstairs. And then when she went back down, she turned around and noticed that all the lights upstairs had been turned back on, and there was only one patient in the ward at the time. So she went up to kind of, get on to him and be like, "What are you doing?" And when she went up there, the patient was actually in bed, but they told her about how they saw this bearded man just going down the hallway, turning on all of the lights. Another nurse saw him at the end of the hall and approached him, thinking that he was a patient who was just kind of wandering the halls. But when she went to ask him what he was doing, he disappeared. He's usually seen on the second and third floors of the hotel. Guests have seen him. And the second and third floors are actually the most active and where most of the reports come from. Now, there's a couple of children who are often seen at the hotel. There's a little boy who's around 4 or 5 who runs up and down the hallways. Sometimes he's laughing, sometimes he's crying. There's another child who is often seen as well. He's a little older, but people say that he just kind of smiles and then disappears. There's another child who is often seen, but I'm not sure if it's the same, like one of the same, but he is seen at the foot of the bed, and it's happened in various rooms, and the people who report it say that he just kind of stands there staring at them, which is kind of funny, but kind of creepy. There's been reports of newborn babies being heard like crying on the third and fourth floors, and along with the scent of baby powder and zinc oxide. And the crying has actually gotten to the point where guests will call the front desk and to report it and kind of be like, "Hey, I'm not sure what's going on." But they're told that the room that they're hearing it in is vacant and there's nobody in there. Shadow apparitions have been seen moving through the halls, entering guests' rooms without warning or even opening a door. Um, there's also a cat that has been seen scratching and meowing at doors and wandering the halls. People say that they get the feeling of a cat kind of brushing around their legs, but when they look down, nothing is there. Some guests have reported that the cat will actually get into bed with them and curl up next to them and sleep through the night. Um, and they also say that when they've awakened in the morning, there's an imprint on, like in the sheets, on the comforter in the bed, as if there was a cat there with you. And it actually shows in room 20 the most. Now, staff who are cleaning the empty rooms have actually become targets for the more prankster spirits. They'll be cleaning and they'll hear their names being called, which you should never answer if you ever hear anybody call your name and you know that you're alone, just because it could be an evil entity or, a vengeful spirit who's trying to get you to, trying to lure you. But, that's for another time. um, they've actually been in the closets where the doors will close on them. An unseen entity apparently did not like the vacuum, like the loud noise in the hallway, and rudely pushed past the woman who was cleaning in the form of like a strong, cold, and unseen presence. And she reported that it nearly knocked her down. Now, hotel staff have reported a lot of activity in the lobby and the sign-in areas. They say the doors will open and close on their own, and when they go to greet whoever came in, there's nobody there. One hotel employee who was sitting at the check-in desk heard a commotion in the gift shop, and when they got over there, they basically walked into contents just flying off the shelves. One time, there was an employee who rearranged the lobby furniture, and then they went like into the back to do something else. And when they came back, the furniture was all in its original spots. And I mean, I hear that there's a lot of spirits who just don't like their territory being moved around. Like, that's why you get a lot of paranormal activity when you renovate or when you're doing construction on an older home and things like that. There was a plaque that had the hotel rules on the wall, and somebody said that they watched it actually lift up off the nail and fly onto the floor. The front desk will get calls from rooms that are vacant. And when they answer the phone, they say that the voices are very distant or kind of gargled, or, it's just disembodied, and it's like they're not even really there. There's an older woman in a white dress that you will see in the stairwell or next to the elevator. There's a woman in a nurse's uniform who's just kind of seen wandering the halls. And there's a doctor in a long coat walking around with a clipboard as if they're still doing their rounds. Now, Manoa Idoff Power, I might have said that incorrectly, but I'm not, with the spelling, I did my best. Sorry to Manoa. Now, this was the caretaker who committed suicide when the building was empty and he was watching over. Now, he was found hanging from a steam pipe in the engineer's office, which was where he lived at the time when he looked over the property, but it's now the boiler room. And there's a lot of reports of shadow figures in this area. Now, room 32 seems to be the most active room. This could be due to the 2 suicides that actually happened in there. One man was a patient who was injured during a mining accident and ended up being confined to a wheelchair. He basically climbed over the balcony and threw himself to the ground below. Another man was a guest in the hotel who shot himself in the head. And he was a businessman, and no one's really sure why he did it. But being a businessman, maybe it was a deal gone wrong. Maybe he just wasn't happy. Maybe he had lost his job recently. But guests report feeling anxious, stuffy, and cramped in this room. And they say that there's times where they, like, almost as if they can't breathe. They often see a man in a kind of turn of the century suit float across the floor, out the door, and onto the balcony. But of course, he's gone when they go to investigate. The bathroom door in this room opens and closes by itself, and the water will also turn on and on by itself. People are seen pacing the hallways and stairwells, but the hallways and stairwells are empty just a few minutes later. Fans will turn on and off by themselves, too. Now, on December 26, 1945, room 37B, 24-year-old psych patient Gerthy May Patch, who suffered from schizophrenia, or so they claim she did anyway, jumped from her window. However, some believe that this may not have been a suicide. They believe she may have been murdered because she had a fracture at the base of the skull, which experts say it would have been consistent with a very forceful blow to the back of the head. Now, of course, she could have, fallen backwards and hit her head on the ground below. However, where it was, she would have had to have landed like in a pretty odd position for it to be like in that location. Also, both of her femurs were fractured, which was also not consistent with somebody who had jumped out a window. She would have had to have fallen backwards, which, once again, I mean, not impossible. However, it's just weird that her injuries don't really match up with somebody jumping from a window. She might have been pushed. Also, she having schizophrenia, she would have been sedated and or restrained, so she wouldn't have even really been able to get out of bed on her own. Some think that she may have been murdered by an orderly, or she may have been murdered by a loved one who put her there due to not having schizophrenia, but possibly being pregnant, which at that time was a no-no, and a lot of families considered it an embarrassment. No, sadly, she didn't die right away. She actually died about 36 hours after she had fallen, which she was found December 26th at around 2:49 p.m., and she died December 28th at 2:49 a.m., which little interesting there with the times. Now, the elevator, like I said, is the original Otis elevator from the 1920s. Of course, it's been restored, and it's still a sight to see, but its story may make you a little uneasy as you board. So in 1935, Claude Harvey was working as a maintenance worker in the hospital. His body was found in the basement on April 3rd, pinned by the back of the neck beneath the Otis elevator. Now, upon investigation, it was found that the elevator was in full working order, and it would have been kind of difficult to fall into the manner in which he did, because his body was outside of the elevator shaft and his head was basically pinned in at the neck. Now, the coroner's inquest determined that the elevator couldn't have caused Claude's death. There is one source that claims that the United Copper Company prohibited an autopsy from being performed, so they actually couldn't be blamed for the accident or if it was intentional. But that actually seems a little more suspicious if you ask me. I get, wanting to kind of avoid any, what would be a good word for that? Any liability. However, I feel like saying, hey, don't do an autopsy, I feel like that's more suspicious. But Claude's death was ultimately ruled as an accident, but it's always been, kind of assumed that he was murdered and that his body was placed under the elevator with his head in the shaft to make it look like an accident or a suicide. His death, along with Gerthy's, are the two that are kind of like haven't been solved. But it seems like Claude doesn't know he's dead. He's been heard and seen roaming the halls and the boiler room, just whistling while working away. There's coughing and sneezing that comes from the laundry room, which was once the basement. Lights in the elevator go on and off, and you can actually hear the noise of the elevator moving from floor to floor when it's literally like standing still on one of the floors. So that's kind of creepy. People feel as if they're being glared at, and when they kind of look around, they see a shadow that retreats either into the elevator or up the stairs. Paranormal investigators actually saw a ghostly figure standing in the basement, just staring at the elevator doors in shock. So I'm kind of wondering if Claude may have been murdered or if it was an accident, if his spirit stood there and like saw his body after his death, which is really sad because I feel like he would, if he was, I mean, either way, if he was murdered or if he felt like, the only way out was suicide, to just kind of stand there and watch the elevator then crush your neck. I feel like that would be really sad to see. So the lobby of the Jerome Grand Hotel is open 24/7. The Asylum restaurant is open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. The public is allowed to visit, but you have to stay on the first floor. You are not allowed to venture upstairs unless you are staying in the hotel. I do say if you decide to take a visit, please respect guests and hotel staff. Just respect their privacy, respect their, don't approach anyone unless like the staff is okay with it. But if they ask you kindly, like, hey, just, um, but yeah. So yeah, just keep it respectful. If you have visited, comment below, and because I would love to hear, I'd love to hear the actual experiences that people have. So yeah, definitely comment below. Tell me all the things. Tell me if you've seen something. Tell me if you've heard something. But yeah, with that note, I will see you next time. Thank you for listening to Creepy Cases and Spooky Spaces, a Pizza and Pigtails production, created and hosted by Cassiopeia. Don't forget, you can find new episodes of the creepiest and spookiest content every Tuesday. If you subscribe to the Patreon or the Anchor pages, which you can do for as little as $5 a month, you get access to bonus episodes every other week, a merchandise discount good for all purchases at the Wick and Faye shop at pizzaandpigtails.com, and you get a thank you swag box full of creepy cases and spooky spaces merchandise. If you'd like to support without subscribing, you can do so through the Cash App and Venmo links. Be sure to follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and all the socials for future news and updates. And don't forget to like, share, and comment. Bring your fellow fiends in on those conversations. And as always, I will see you next crime.